Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of The Process Fixer. Today is a little bit of a special edition. I'm actually in the process of wrapping up the show. As you've seen, I haven't been as consistent lately. We've got great content on other platforms. You can go over to our website and get involved in our online training and the courses that I'm doing over there. I'm talking about a lot of different things, but I'm also going to be launching a new project, a new podcast with a friend of mine, Aaron Baer. You'll be hearing more about that in the coming weeks. Listen, I want to introduce you to Teddie today because Teddie is a process fixer. We met about a year ago, and Teddie has been certified in the method. He's been out practicing the method. And today we really decided to just sit down and talk a little bit about the type of work that he does. And that's a lot of that is because ERP is such a big thing. I think it's the CRM trend of the 90s or 2000s, right? I mean, ERP is a big thing right now. You're an expert in ERPs and in the implementation of them, as well as doing a lot of work around AI now.
That's right.
So tell me a little bit about the business and what you do, and then we'll talk a little bit about how you bring process fixing into this and process triage and those kind of things.
Yeah, sure thing. I really look at what I do for clients as being a utility player in the organization. So we help with everything from techno-functional consulting to being an additional administrator and managed service to custom development, to helping them integrate their systems between each other. So really looking at what is the core need that they have and figuring out what things they need support-wise from my organization to be able to help them achieve their goals.
So are you doing implementation or post-implementation fix?
Doing a little bit of both, but I primarily focus around the post-implementation fix.
So they did it and they just did it wrong.
Yeah,
because
right now, really what the landscape looks like is if you, let's say, you're getting too big for QuickBooks and spreadsheets, and now you're getting into like, well, I need a full-on ERP. You end up moving up, and out of a couple of different options, NetSuite becomes one of the leading options for you. And if you decide to implement, you either go with Oracle NetSuite's professional services or with another consulting firm to do the implementation. And typically what's happening is once you sign off on, yes, I'm ready to go live, yes, that's finished, you find out a lot of things within the first 90 days, like, oh, this was not really scoped out, or this was outside of what we were talking about during the implementation phase, or, oh, these edge cases weren't considered. And now I have more of this manual process and things like that I've got to deal with. Well, I'm not getting the value out of my system that I thought I was paying for when I moved over from QuickBooks and spreadsheets now into paying for this, more costly system that I thought I'd be getting efficiencies out of.
Can I ask a question about why is that? Because listen, I talk to CEO groups every week, and every time I say the word ERP, everybody groans, right? Because they've all probably had a bad experience with ERP. And I wonder about that. Is that because they didn't know what they were, is it because they were sold a bill of goods on the front end? Or is it because they didn't talk to the actual people who were going to touch the ERP and do the work to understand the work that they do, right? What I'm saying is it executive function to determine what we're going to use and what should be implemented? And then once you get into the field, you realize this is not what the executives thought, or is it something else?
When you look at organizations, especially as you're growing, most of your attention and resources go into R&D, sales, marketing, and these type of things that drive revenue. And then as you start growing past a certain point, you look at your operations, your accounting, your finance, and say like, okay, we're about to explode at the seams. What do we do so that we can make sure that this doesn't become a bottleneck for our growth? It's like, okay, well, now we need to move to a system that accommodates this. What's the typical thing that happens? All right, well, the executives will say, all right, looks like we need a new system. All right, here's the system we're selecting. You guys, figure it out, implement it. And what that entails is, well, now do your job. And now there's a full-time job on top of your full-time job to test this, figure out if this is going to work, and then go through the implementation. And now that it's live, run your normal process out of it, and hopefully nothing explodes while you're in this new phase. So a lot of it is they weren't looking at what they were currently doing closely enough to understand if this system is going to work the way it's configured. The system itself works well if you understand how to configure it to what you need, but there's a lot of layers of questions that should go through in that are not being asked in the right places.
So let's talk a little bit more about that.
Sure.
So a lot of this is it the disconnect between what executives believe needs to be done and what actually happens at the front line? Is it I mean, this is true. When you do an ERP, somebody's got to manage this whole thing on top of their job. There's not somebody on that side that just sits around and waits for ERP implementations, unless you have a project management office or something like that. We've seen ERP implementations that have been very successful with organizations that have a PMO, right? They have an office of project management with 2 or 3 project managers in there, not project managers that are out in the field doing work, but project managers that are managing internal projects, integrations, implementation, training, those kind of things. So is it the disconnect, or is it both? Is it them not really knowing how the work gets done, or not having the bandwidth internally to actually execute on the implementation itself?
I would say it's both, because if you're looking at, if they start off not knowing what needs to be done, they're already starting from a flawed premise. So no matter how well you try to plan this out,
if you don't know what, how do you get to the how? Yeah,
exactly. So looking at it from, do we even know what the current process is and what we're doing and why we're doing it? What are the inputs? What are the desired outputs? And then overlaying like, well, what are we doing now because of resource constraint, because of system constraint? And if we were to move to something that had different capabilities, could we use the same inputs and then have the same outputs without doing some of these things in between? Really taking a zoomed out look at, is what we're doing, it makes sense for our context currently, but will it make sense in the context of us, how we do things going forward?
Yeah.
So some of the places I've seen failures are not considering things from that perspective. And then on top of that, it's a resource constraint, because in mid-market companies, you don't have typically a team that's just doing this. As
you don't have 3 PMO project managers for 120 grand a year just sitting on the bench waiting for something to do.
No, you have your accounting team who is already maxed out and working, overtime hours. Now you're asking them to now test this on top of your month end, your quarter end close,
and learn a whole new system, right? Because it's not. I mean, unless you really config it, you got to learn some new things.
Oh yeah, and that's a big deal. It's a change management aspect is a huge deal. And even if, let's say, your system is configured perfectly and it's exactly what you need, if the people that are using it don't feel comfortable that it's accurate, don't know how to use it, don't know how to pull the reporting and data out of it, they feel a level of insecurity that it causes them to create more work for themselves, because they'll say, well, I don't know, I don't feel comfortable that this is all correct. So let me figure it out, pull it all out of here, put it in Excel and do my own manual reconciliation and checking and all of these kind of things that are actually not necessary if the data that's first in the system is correct and it's set up in a way that makes sense, so that when you pull the insights out of it, you can trust them. So it's a level of trust that they have to have about the inputs and the outputs of the system before they can actually experience the efficiencies of having it implemented. Otherwise, even having it doesn't actually give you anything as a gain.
Yeah.
And even beyond that, there's a level of resistance and friction from the internal staff of changing over to the new way of doing things if they don't buy in going into the process.
Yeah, and I think that buy-in is really a big piece. I think this emergence of change management so much anymore, in some senses, is because we're not listening to the people and we're trying to mandate down to them what to work on, versus the approach that you've learned here at the Process Fixer, which is bringing those believables together, the people that are at the front line, and actually saying, show us what you're working with here. And then allowing them to identify that, understand their bottlenecks and pain, and then being able to say back to them, well, I'm going to help alleviate that. That's a little different, because change, I think people are resistant to change unless they really want it. And then it's bliss.
Right.
If you're in jail and you're getting out on Friday, you're not sitting there going, well, I'm so worried about the change. No, you're like, I'm getting out of jail, man. This is a good thing, right? So I think people are more, and you talked about this a moment ago, I think a lot of process is sufficient. Very few process is efficient, and even fewer still processes are resilient, able to actually hold up to the punches of the real world. And as I talk about in my last book, Adapt Agility, adaptable and agile enough that if there is a change that's, to actually flow with what's happening with AI, all the things that are happening out there, because AI is disrupting everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that we're looking at now is, if right now is the worst AI is ever going to be,
which it is. Yeah. It's always going to get better.
Right. And if we're looking at its capabilities as of today, not what's possible in some future, there's a lot of things now that we're doing that don't make any sense. I'll give you some quick examples as far as what I've seen just from my own personal business and what I'm seeing in some of these organizations, taking notes during a meeting, for example.
Totally unnecessary. Yeah.
I found myself not taking any notes. I turn on the recorder. I have transcription. I'm fully present, looking somebody in the face, or during meetings, I'm looking at what they're saying and engaging with them fully, rather than trying to scribble down notes to take key ideas down. And what that's doing now is instead of doing that, I can be fully present. Therefore, I'm picking up more and getting more out of these meetings. And then these things will then turn into key takeaways and insights from a transcription that then we can use as documentation, that we can use to drive projects. We can look at, what are the priorities that came out of this? So thinking about these type of things will change how we conduct the things that need to take place, but it's in a place where not only is it, oh, we're going to be more efficient, it'll change how we do things from a fundamental perspective.
I think my good friend Aaron Baer talks about this all the time. Is it's like the next 2 or 3 years are 10 times more disruptive than the last 2 or 3 years, right? Because now AI, it's reached sort of the tipping point. People are using it regularly. People are augmenting their work with it. I'm augmenting my work with it. I'm still doing, I think, the same level. No, I would say I'm doing higher level thinking now than I ever did before, because the mundane, the deep research, the things that I need to do, instead of going and combing 30 websites to find out the story, I can ask ChatGPT and bam, that quickly. I mean, we were talking about this in one of the breaks today that, the weight of an average person after the Great Depression, like finding that out is really, really difficult. But I asked ChatGPT and it's like, well, here's what the average weight was in 1942. Understand that we had about a 50% caloric deficiency during that time. 10 years of that, here's what the average weight of an average American is. And I'm like, wow, like that was a complicated thing that it figured out in fractions of a second without even having the data points, but having relevant enough external data points to bring that together into something that really works. And so let's pivot a little bit and talk about how you've used the process triage method and the process mapping method to improve ERP implementations, or how you're going to do that in the future.
Yeah, so I actually just had a discovery session with a client where I'm using this methodology to look at, well, what are you doing today? How is it working? Why are you doing it this way? Where are the current pain points? And then if we were to figure out, okay, this is how you're currently doing it. Here's where your current pain points are. You give me your order of priority of what thing matters the most to you and what its current like quantifiable effect is. Well, we can strategically and tactically go through, address these things and make sure they're part of that first version of what gets launched for an ERP so that you immediately get value from what you're spending on. And then say, okay, well, with our overarching goal in mind of making sure we remedy these top priorities, how do we put together a plan that maps into it? So even if it's not part of the phase one, well, it's foundationally building on top of each other so that phase two will now bring in the next teams that make sense. And now phase three, we can bring in the production that's going to be more complicated. But during all of these points, it's more of an agile approach to this type of implementation that you're going through a sprint, you're coming back, you're getting value out of it, you're getting feedback, you're iterating the system, the users are giving their input and their experiences through it, thereby making it a more resilient system. And then you're layering more complexity and more functionality into it, bringing more of the organization into it, and then building on top of each other in that way, rather than kind of the traditional waterfall approach, which is take down all the requirements of what you think they are when you're starting, build it all the way out, and then ask for a test to be taken place. And then now it's gone live and you're seeing all these things break. And now you're trying to figure out, well, what do I address first? What do I address next? Because not anything is working the way that we thought it was.
Well, and to your point, people are resistant to that too, because now it doesn't work. So they default back to the old method. But I think what we've found with process triage, we're working with a company that builds ERPs in the healthcare industry. And really, what they found is that by including customers, employees, the people that actually touch and do the work in these workshops and hearing their voice, now it's their idea. Like I have it on the wall over here, right? Those who write the plan don't fight the plan. The change management aspect is really difficult because people don't want to change when they're resistant. I love what my wife says about this, and she talked about this on one of the earlier podcasts for Process Fixers. It's like people aren't resistant to change. They're just displaying resistant behaviors. And there's a way to get them out of that resistant behavior. And the primary way is to make it their idea. If it's their idea, they're like, well, why would I fight this? This is going to help me. And even if something is your idea and it's not working out right, you're like, well, I'll power through it. I'll get through the training because I know what's happening on the other side. It's really casting that vision to say, here's what your world looks like after this. Hearing their problems. I think many times because we automate systems, we just exacerbate the existing problem and make it go faster. Well, that doesn't help anybody, particularly if you're on the other side of that, having to drink from that fire hose every day. That's not a good thing. So I think it's really about engaging the minds of everybody in it and saying, look, let's do this together. I think a lot of times there's a lot of finger pointing that happens in this process too. And you probably see this a lot with failed implementations. But if we can put the system on the wall and we can all point to that, then we can solve that problem together. But if I'm blaming you and you're blaming me, we're never going to get resolution. The resolution comes from standing up against the wall together and saying, what is our plan? What are even doing a little bit of a pre-retrospective and saying, hey, look, where are we going to get screwed up here? We just did it with a map for an ERP company where we actually identified the 4 places in the process where we're like, if we don't have your user data on this date, you understand that's like 30 days we lose. Oh, wow, really? See, in the past, we just didn't have the data and then we threatened. Now, before we sign the contract, we're going, hey, just don't forget we need it right here. Oh, well, it's going to take us a little longer. Okay, well, then let's push out the launch. Let's do this. Let's work together because we can see it together on the wall that this is the problem. And I respect you because I love what you've done here, which is really seeing this method of getting people involved in the process and going, that's the future of ERP implementation. It's got to come from the people that are affected by the ERP implementation, not just from the heads up above.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have a really good example where we saw some things that were low-hanging fruit that would materially change the ability to get closer to their goal. And all it took was a little bit of coordination. So for instance, they're saying, okay, down on production, they needed these data points, these sizes, but it was not coming in every time from the orders that were coming in. That's just a control issue. The people that were putting in the orders were like, I didn't know that you needed that every single time. I didn't know it was a big deal. I'll put it on there every time from now on and
solve the problem.
The problem is solved.
It's wild how many times that happens. I got to tell you, almost every workshop we do, there's something. We had one just recently where they had a problem with their ERP. And one of the executives is sitting in the back. And he's like, wait, I'm sorry, what? And they all start talking about it. And they're like, how painful it is. And he's like, hold on. That's a freaking setting. I don't even need to call the developer. I can change the setting right now. And they're like, can you? He's like, yeah. They're like, well, we don't have that option. He's like, oh, because I'm a super admin. Okay, now they log into his. We put it up on the screen and we're like, oh, do you guys want this? Like, do you want that? Yeah, we want that. We're knocking off all the pain points. All these things that were problems weren't actually problems. They were a hierarchical administration of the system. And being able to understand what the system is capable of and then know the problems that people have and aligning those capabilities with those problems and resolving them, that's a pretty cool thing.
And that's really the sweet spot, right? Why do you bring in somebody that's external that knows the system very well, that has expertise in it? It's so that they can unreveal the unknown unknowns to you, because there's going to be
what's possible, right?
Yeah, there's going to be
what's the possibility.
There's going to be blind spots. So what's this capable of? You're just working through what you know is possible and whatever fix it you can put in place to just get things done. But bringing somebody that has experience with, especially with other clients in your space, bringing those best practices and insights. Yeah. I'll give you another example. I thought that was really, really telling. That there was a process that they had a temp doing that she had taken over the process from somebody else that had taken over from somebody else. But the controller had been doing this like 2 or 3 versions ago. When we put it on the wall, it was 27 steps to go from start to finish that had all of these steps that were completely unnecessary.
Yeah.
And when she was putting up on the wall, the controller's like, wait, you're doing what? Why? Like, oh, the person before this was a very meticulous.
That's what I was trained on, right? Somebody trained me to do it. On-the-job training. I talk about it all the time.
They trained me to do this, and the person before it that would develop additional steps in this process was overly meticulous for something that was basically an accrual. It's an estimate.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, do we need to be this accurate in the estimate? No. So it doesn't make sense to do all these steps to get closer for an estimate that's based on all of these assumptions to begin with. So just completely eliminating the need for all of these manual steps happened just because there was alignment around like, well, this is what you're actually doing to actually get this output and get it done. So putting these things up on the wall and having everyone talk through it, I think it's something that it's difficult to happen when you're in the middle of doing your everyday job. So taking everybody off of the floor, away from their computers for an entire day, saying like, okay, what does it take to get this job done from start to finish in this process, and having them put it up on a wall and then talk to each other about it. It's something that reveals a lot that otherwise is invisible to them because they're in silos around what they do on a daily basis. So they don't know how they're affecting each other without getting this type of alignment in one space together. So I thought that was something that we saw a lot of insights that came out of in the sessions I've run.
So this is actually, there's a name for this called Parkinson's Law. And it says that work expands to fit the time allotted for it. So I wonder how many times somebody gets trained and maybe at their last job, they had all sorts of responsibilities and all sorts of tasks they took care of. And they get into this job and somebody's like, well, here's the work. And they're like, well, that's only like 30 minutes of work a week. And that's what they're thinking in their head. And they're like, well, that's the whole job. It's like, okay, well, do I just work the 30 minutes and then raise my hand to my manager and say, I don't have anything to do? No, nobody does that because they're afraid they'll lose their job, or they'll cast doubt on the person that used to do the job before. And it's like, well, why didn't she say something? So instead, we just figure out ways to expand that work. And I think sometimes that's needless steps. It's busy work. It's the TPS reports, if you've ever seen Office Space. Right?
I used to write TPS reports. I worked at Toyota.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So the TPS reports, it's meetings, right? It's all sorts of extra steps, checking status updates, doing all these kind of things, because I always think it's funny that that hourly employees, if you tell them it's a 40-hour-a-week job, they always get exactly 40 hours on their time card. Isn't that odd? They don't get a 39.5-hour week one week and a 42. The work always fits perfectly inside those 40 hours. That seems very odd to me because it doesn't. We just make it that it fits. We drag things out. And I don't think this is intentional for most people. I think this is just, look, they're paying me for 40 hours. This is my job. I got to make it work inside 40 hours. And that's a real danger. And I think you saw that in that process. It's like there's steps in there that are unnecessary, but they filled time. And I don't want to fill time. I don't want to pay people for time. I want to pay people for work.
Sure.
Right. I had this happen at a manufacturing company I was running a couple of years ago where we just went to the employees and said, look, here's the objective for the week. Here's what we need to accomplish. When that is accomplished, you go home. You still get paid for the whole week to 40 hours. It doesn't matter when you're done, as long as the quality and the quantity hit the expectations, your obligation is done and you can leave. And it was funny because I think most weeks they probably worked about 30 hours. And my predecessor in that organization always had overtime. They got less done with overtime before, but when I all of a sudden incentivized them and I paid them for the work, not for the time, all of a sudden they were like, we don't need to do that step. I think the same would happen in that instance. If you'd have told that woman, hey, we're going to pay you when the job's done, not based upon how many hours you work, she would have figured out real quick how to get that thing down to 3 or 4 steps. She would have questioned, she would have thought about it, but we just don't do that because we haven't been trained to do that. And we're not incentivized to do it in the Western management philosophy, right? Somebody raises their hand and says, this only takes me an hour a week, but I'm getting paid for 40. We fire them, right? So they have no incentive whatsoever to raise their hand and say something's not right.
No, I think incentivization is exactly the reason why a lot more people don't do this. And I've also seen that. I've experienced it myself. There are some jobs I've had in the past. I was like, well, it only takes me 30 minutes to do this. It takes everybody else 8 full hours to do it. But after I do it, I look like I'm not doing anything. They're like, oh, well, why don't you read the manual? Why are you not doing more? Like I've got more output than everyone else around me. So I've seen the reasons why you do that is so that you stay in line. I know that there's a saying in Europe about not being the tallest flower or something like this, where it's like you want to
flower gets picked. Yeah.
So, something like that. You want to try and stay within
the boundaries. Of the average. I worked a union job right out of high school. And I remember after my first day out there busting my hump, guy came out and he's like, bro,
you're going too fast.
This is not for you, man. You are going way too fast. You're going to make us all look bad. And he's like, just pace yourself. He's like, and I'm like, okay, that's good. I mean, there's a company called Kongo Gumi that is the oldest company in the world. This Japanese company was formed in 578 AD, so 1450 years old. And I love the family motto for Kongo Gumi because it really flies in the face of Western management. The first thing is never overexert yourself. Now, did you ever tell your employees never overexert yourself? I mean, that's just crazy, right? The second one is do quality work. And the third is don't drink too much, which I'm like, okay, I can agree with 2 of the 3, but this idea that don't overexert yourself. Here in the United States, we expect people to overexert themselves. That company and that Japanese culture is like, no, let's get the right work done that needs to be done for the customer. And let's not worry too much. If it's too heavy a load, get somebody else to help, but build the system around you that it is the right load to get solid work done. And that you don't need to drink too much, right? Because I think sometimes we get so stressed out about work that we're like, we take it out on alcohol or whatever it might be. So this is interesting, Teddie, and I'm excited to have you as part. I mean, you came through about a year ago and did some training, but really just started. It takes a long time to develop this, right? To get people thinking this way. I'm excited to see where you go in the future with this. And listen, I think if you're a client, if you are a Vistage member or in any of the groups that I talk to, about 40% of you all complain to me that your ERP is in real bad shape. Call Teddie because he's done this a lot. So it isn't just about, oh, I don't want to call and pay for a consultant to do something that my people can do. No, they can't do it because they haven't seen the implementation over and over and over and understand the pattern. A good consultant can do more in 1 hour than one of your people could do in 2 or 3 days because they understand what to do and what to fix. Teddie, thanks for being here. If people want to find out more about you, how do they do that? Where do they go?
Yeah, you can find me on my website, tfr.solutions. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Teddie Reyes.
Nice. Thank you all for being here. This is another edition of The Process Fixer. That might be the last one, because we are going to be replacing it with this other show. I'm sure I'll still come out once in a while and throw something out there to you. But I encourage you to go over to the website, find out more about our online training and the content that I have for paid subscribers now. There's a lot of that coming, and it's fun stuff. It's not just talking heads. There's a lot of animation to it. There's a lot of graphics to it. It's very compelling storytelling. And it's if you've been invested, you know what I do with the stories. And we've got dozens of those that are going to be coming out over the next few months. And I encourage you to go over and subscribe to that today. Until next time.